Real authority never needs to raise its voice because the truth has a way of arriving exactly when everyone else has stopped looking for it. The first thing I heard that morning was not birds singing or moving trucks rumbling through Willow Creek Estates. It was the sharp click of a clipboard closing and the unmistakable sound of someone clearing her throat behind me while I unloaded the last banker box from the bed of my dark blue pickup truck. Freshly cut grass filled the warm spring air, sprinklers whispered across perfectly trimmed lawns, and rows of expensive homes reflected the bright morning sunlight like something pulled from a real estate brochure. It looked like the kind of neighborhood where every mailbox matched, every hedge was measured, and every rule was expected to be followed without question. I had barely lived there for 20 minutes. I turned around and found a woman standing on the sidewalk with flawless posture, neatly styled blonde hair, and a navy blazer that looked more official than necessary for a residential neighborhood. A polished badge clipped near her lapel displayed the familiar 3 letters that nearly every homeowner in America recognizes immediately. HOA. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that expected agreement before the conversation even started. "Good morning," she said. "I am Linda Ashcroft, president of the Homeowners Association. Welcome to Willow Creek Estates." I introduced myself, shook her hand politely, and listened while she explained architectural guidelines, landscaping requirements, mailbox standards, parking regulations, and community expectations with the confidence of someone who had repeated the same speech hundreds of times before. When she finished, she handed me a thick welcome packet. I accepted it, thanked her, and calmly asked a simple question. "Before I sign anything, could you tell me which recorded document makes my property part of this association?" Her smile disappeared almost instantly. She looked at me as though I had skipped an obvious step everyone else accepted without thinking. "Every home here belongs to the association," she replied. I nodded once before answering in the same calm voice I had used since she arrived. "I am not a member." The silence that followed felt strangely heavy despite the cheerful neighborhood around us. A lawn mower hummed somewhere down the street while a delivery truck rolled past without slowing down. Linda stared at me for several seconds before letting out a short laugh that sounded more dismissive than amused. "That is not how this works," she said. "You purchased property inside this community." I lifted another banker box from my truck and set it carefully on the driveway. "I purchased property," I replied. "Membership is a different question." She asked whether I intended to refuse every community rule. I told her I intended to follow every law that actually applied to my property. Her expression hardened. Without another word, she stepped back onto the sidewalk, removed her phone, and made a call. I continued unloading boxes while hearing only fragments of the conversation. She described a homeowner refusing to cooperate and requested an officer respond to the address. Less than 15 minutes later, a marked police cruiser turned slowly into the driveway. 2 officers stepped out, calm and professional, greeting both of us before asking what seemed to be the problem. Linda immediately explained that I was refusing to recognize the authority of the association and insisted they needed to document the situation before it escalated further. One of the officers looked toward me with a polite expression and asked whether I wished to respond. I simply reached into the cab of my truck, removed a plain manila envelope that had traveled with me since closing day, and held it in my hands without opening it. "Officer," I said quietly, "before anyone decides who has authority here, I think we should first determine who actually has it." The older police officer accepted the manila envelope without making assumptions, opened it carefully on the hood of his cruiser, and quietly examined the closing documents inside while his younger partner remained beside Linda Ashcroft listening patiently. The neighborhood had become noticeably quieter. A few residents stood at the ends of their driveways pretending to water flowers or check the mail while clearly watching every movement taking place in front of my house. The officer flipped through each page slowly before looking up at me. "Sir, these appear to be legitimate closing documents," he said in a calm voice. I nodded. "They are," I replied. Linda immediately stepped forward and insisted that ownership inside Willow Creek Estates automatically required membership in the Homeowners Association. The officer looked back toward her with professional courtesy and asked whether she had a recorded declaration or another legal document showing that my parcel had been submitted to the association. She hesitated for the first time since introducing herself. "The management company has all of that," she answered. The officer politely explained that without reviewing those documents, this was a civil matter rather than a criminal one. After a few more respectful questions, both officers wished us a pleasant afternoon and drove away without issuing warnings, citations, or instructions to either side. As the patrol car disappeared around the corner, Linda looked directly at me. "This is not over," she said with complete confidence. I simply thanked her for stopping by and carried another banker box into the house. I had learned many years earlier that arguments rarely solve legal questions. Documents usually do. During the following week, Willow Creek Estates settled back into what appeared to be its normal routine. Every morning the sprinklers began before sunrise. Landscaping crews trimmed hedges with almost mathematical precision. Delivery trucks moved quietly through the neighborhood, while joggers waved politely as they passed. From the outside, everything looked peaceful. My mailbox quickly told a different story. The first certified letter arrived 3 days after the police visit. It welcomed me to the association and requested immediate completion of membership paperwork. The second informed me that my pickup truck had remained in the driveway longer than community guidelines supposedly permitted during move-in. The third explained that my exterior lighting required architectural approval before any future modifications. Each envelope carried official letterhead, reference numbers, and language clearly intended to encourage immediate compliance. I read every page carefully before placing each letter into a separate expanding file organized by date. I never threw anything away. Every envelope, every notice, every certified receipt received its own place. By the end of the second week, the collection had already begun filling the top drawer of my office desk. I never replied emotionally because emotion was never the issue. Instead, I mailed one short certified response after another using exactly the same sentence each time. Please identify the recorded document establishing that my parcel is subject to the governing declaration referenced in your correspondence. Nothing more, nothing less. The answers that returned never actually answered the question. Some repeated community rules. Others quoted bylaws or architectural standards. One attached several pages describing neighborhood expectations. None included the one thing I kept requesting. No recorded declaration. No county recording information. No legal description connecting my property to the association. Every response carefully circled around the issue while avoiding its center. Meanwhile, another process had quietly begun outside the neighborhood. Several phone calls appeared on my calendar with attorneys, title professionals, and business partners who never once discussed landscaping rules or mailbox colors. We spoke about recording schedules, closing timelines, lease obligations, and filings that still required final signatures. Those conversations had nothing to do with arguing against the association. At least, that was what everyone inside Willow Creek Estates believed. Linda continued treating me like a stubborn homeowner refusing to follow simple rules. She had absolutely no reason to suspect that the question I kept asking about recorded authority was the very same question that would eventually change everything. By the beginning of the third week, the routine had become almost predictable. Every Monday brought another certified envelope. Every Wednesday seemed to produce a fresh reminder about community standards. Every Friday ended with another notice politely informing me that additional fines could eventually be considered if I continued refusing to comply with association requirements. The pattern was so consistent that I could almost guess which day the mail carrier would hand me another official envelope before he even reached my driveway. I accepted every letter with the same polite smile, signed every certified receipt, and carried each document directly into my home office without opening it until I had finished whatever work I was already doing. Nothing about the process felt personal to me anymore. It had become documentation, and documentation has a rhythm if you are patient enough to notice it. My expanding file drawer slowly became 2 drawers. Every notice remained organized by date. Every envelope stayed attached to the corresponding letter, and every response I mailed back received its own copy together with certified mailing receipts. If someone ever wanted to reconstruct every conversation from the very beginning, they could do it page by page without missing a single detail. Linda Ashcroft, however, appeared increasingly convinced that persistence alone would eventually wear me down. One afternoon, I found another notice attached neatly to my front door explaining that my pickup truck had again exceeded the permitted parking period after move-in. The truck had not moved because I had spent the day assembling furniture and unpacking office equipment inside the house. I removed the notice carefully, placed it inside a clear document sleeve, and continued carrying another bookshelf into my study without saying a word. The following morning, I received an electronic message inviting me to appear before the Architectural Review Committee regarding several alleged compliance concerns. I responded the same afternoon using exactly the same sentence that had appeared in every previous certified letter. Please identify the recorded document establishing that my parcel is subject to the governing declaration referenced in your correspondence. Their reply arrived 2 days later. It discussed neighborhood harmony, architectural consistency, and community expectations in great detail. Once again, it never answered the actual question. That silence interested me far more than any accusation they continued making. Outside the neighborhood, my own calendar quietly filled with appointments that had nothing to do with homeowner disputes. I spent one morning meeting with a title officer reviewing updated recording schedules. Another afternoon disappeared inside the county recorder's office confirming document sequencing and filing procedures. Later that week, I joined a conference call with legal counsel discussing lease assignments, closing conditions, and final signatures still moving through the system. None of those conversations mentioned Willow Creek Estates directly, yet every one of them carried a quiet importance that could not be measured by the stack of HOA notices growing inside my office. Late one afternoon, as I returned from another meeting, I noticed Linda speaking with 2 board members near the clubhouse entrance. The moment my truck entered the parking lot across the street, all 3 looked in my direction. Their conversation stopped almost immediately. One board member unfolded several papers while Linda pointed briefly toward my house before everyone disappeared inside the building. I simply continued driving home. Through my front window later that evening, I watched the clubhouse lights remain on much longer than usual while shadows moved behind the large windows. Something was changing. Whether they realized it or not, every unanswered question, every certified letter, and every document they chose not to produce was slowly building a record far more powerful than any violation notice they could place on my front door, and somewhere beyond the neighborhood, another collection of documents was moving steadily toward a closing date that would soon make all of those missing answers impossible to ignore. The last certified letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon, just as dark clouds began gathering above Willow Creek Estates, bringing the scent of approaching rain and the distant sound of thunder rolling across the neighborhood. I carried the envelope into my office, placed it beside the growing stack of correspondence, and noticed something different before I even opened it. The return address no longer belonged only to the association. Their legal counsel had now become involved. The letter explained that my continued refusal to acknowledge the governing authority of the association might result in additional legal action and invited me to attend a formal board meeting the following week to resolve the matter. I read every sentence twice, placed the document into its file, and smiled for the first time in several days. They had finally taken the exact step I had quietly hoped they would take. Within an hour, I was seated in a downtown conference room across from my attorney, surrounded by neatly organized folders, title reports, property maps, and county recording indexes spread across a polished oak table. No voices were raised. No one spoke dramatically. Every conversation centered on dates, document numbers, recording references, and closing requirements. My attorney reviewed each page with remarkable patience before looking up and asking the only question that truly mattered. Has anyone from the association ever produced a recorded declaration connecting your parcel to their governing documents? I answered exactly as I had answered every certified letter. No. He nodded once, made a short note in the margin of his legal pad, and slid another folder toward me. Inside were updated title commitments, lease schedules, recorded easements, and several documents still awaiting final filing with the county recorder. None of them appeared connected to my disagreement with the association, at least not in any obvious way. Yet every page represented another piece of a much larger transaction quietly approaching completion. Before leaving the office, my attorney reminded me not to change anything about my responses. Stay consistent, he said. Keep asking for the recorded authority. Let them continue building their own record. The following morning, I visited the county recorder's office once again. The familiar scent of paper, printer toner, and old filing cabinets greeted me as clerks processed stacks of deeds and legal instruments beneath bright fluorescent lights. I spent less than 20 minutes confirming anticipated recording schedules before thanking the staff and returning to my truck. My telephone rang before I had even started the engine. It was one of the transaction coordinators handling the larger acquisition. She informed me that every remaining signature had been received and that final recording could occur sooner than originally expected if no unexpected issues appeared during the last review. I thanked her, ended the call, and drove back toward Willow Creek Estates beneath steady rainfall tapping softly against the windshield. When I turned into the neighborhood entrance, I noticed fresh signs announcing the upcoming board meeting where homeowners were encouraged to attend discussions regarding community compliance and enforcement. Linda Ashcroft stood beside the clubhouse speaking with several residents, occasionally pointing toward printed notices displayed on an easel near the entrance. She noticed my truck passing, watched me for a moment, and gave a confident nod that suggested she believed the meeting would finally settle everything. I simply returned the gesture with a polite wave before continuing home. She believed the coming week would place me under increasing pressure. What she could not possibly know was that somewhere inside the county recording system, a different set of documents was moving through its final review, and once those pages received their official recording stamps, every unanswered question I had patiently asked from the very beginning would finally receive an answer that no one inside the association was expecting. Monday evening arrived with the kind of quiet confidence that usually comes before an important decision. The summer sun hung low over Willow Creek Estates, casting long golden shadows across perfectly trimmed lawns while neighbors slowly made their way toward the clubhouse. Folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows inside the meeting room. Fresh coffee sat on a side table beside trays of packaged cookies, and a projector displayed the association logo on a large white screen at the front of the room. The atmosphere looked friendly on the surface, yet there was an unmistakable tension beneath the polite greetings and casual conversations. As I walked inside carrying nothing more than a slim leather portfolio, several homeowners glanced in my direction before quickly looking away. By then, many of them knew I had received repeated notices from the association. Some probably expected a heated argument. Others looked genuinely curious to see how the evening would unfold. Linda Ashcroft stood near the front speaking confidently with the association attorney and several board members. Thick binders rested on the conference table beside neatly stacked agendas prepared for every homeowner in attendance. When she noticed me entering the room, she offered a professional smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Walker," she said. "I believe tonight we can finally resolve this matter." I returned the smile with equal courtesy and simply replied, "I hope so." I selected a chair near the middle of the room rather than sitting in the front or the back. My leather portfolio remained closed on my lap while conversations continued around me. I had attended enough business meetings over the years to recognize when people believe they already knew the outcome before the first discussion even began. At precisely 7 o'clock, Linda tapped the microphone and welcomed everyone. She reviewed routine community business first, discussing landscaping contracts, maintenance schedules, upcoming neighborhood events, and budget updates. The room remained relaxed until she reached the final item listed on the printed agenda. She paused briefly before announcing that the board would address a continuing compliance matter involving one homeowner who had declined to recognize the authority of the association despite multiple opportunities to cooperate. Every eye in the room shifted toward me. Linda summarized weeks of correspondence, certified notices, and unanswered requests from the association's perspective. She spoke calmly and confidently, emphasizing consistency, community standards, and fairness for every resident. When she finished, the association attorney stood and explained that voluntary compliance remained the preferred solution. He then turned toward me and invited me to explain why I believe the governing documents did not apply to my property. I stood slowly, opened my portfolio, and removed a single sheet containing copies of every written request I had sent during the previous several weeks. I did not deliver a speech. I simply read the same sentence that had appeared in every certified response. Please identify the recorded document establishing that my parcel is subject to the governing declaration referenced in your correspondence. Silence settled across the room. The attorney reviewed the paper before looking toward Linda. She immediately began searching through one of the thick binders stacked beside her, while another board member opened a second binder. Pages turned quickly. Tabs were checked. Additional folders appeared on the table. Minutes passed as the room grew noticeably quieter. Finally, the attorney asked whether anyone had obtained the county recording reference I had requested. No one answered immediately. At that exact moment, the clubhouse entrance opened quietly behind the audience. Several people instinctively turned toward the sound as two professionally dressed individuals stepped inside, carrying matching document cases. Neither person said a word upon entering. They simply paused near the doorway, exchanged a brief glance with me, and waited patiently while the board continued searching for an answer they still could not find. The room remained completely still as the two visitors closed the clubhouse door behind them with quiet professionalism instead of dramatic urgency. One carried a slim leather briefcase, while the other held a secure document case marked with the logo of a regional law firm. Neither interrupted the meeting. They simply waited until the association attorney acknowledged their presence with a puzzled expression. My attorney offered a polite smile before introducing himself and his colleague. "Good evening. We apologize for arriving a few moments after the meeting began. We are here at Mr. Ethan Walker's request." Linda Ashcroft looked from me to the attorneys and back again. Her confidence remained visible, but I noticed the first hint of uncertainty in her eyes. She asked whether their attendance had been approved by the board. My attorney answered respectfully that the meeting involved legal questions concerning property rights, recorded documents, and the authority being asserted over my parcel. He explained that his clients believed complete and accurate information would benefit everyone present. The association attorney agreed that they could speak. My attorney opened his briefcase, removed several neatly organized folders, and placed certified copies on the conference table without raising his voice. Before discussing compliance, he said, "We believe the board should understand an important transaction that has recently concluded." Several homeowners leaned forward in their chairs. Linda folded her hands together and listened carefully. My attorney continued, "Mr. Walker is not simply a homeowner who recently purchased a residence in this neighborhood. He is the authorized representative of Cedar Ridge Property Holdings, the investment company that completed the acquisition of several commercial parcels supporting facilities currently used by this community." A quiet murmur spread through the room. One homeowner whispered to another while several board members exchanged confused looks. Linda frowned slightly before asking what those commercial parcels had to do with the association. My attorney calmly opened another folder and slid several recorded documents across the table. These properties include the land beneath the clubhouse parking area, the management office building, and additional facilities currently occupied under existing lease agreements. No one spoke for several seconds. The association attorney adjusted his glasses and carefully examined the first page before turning to the next. Each document displayed official county recording information together with recording dates that matched the transaction timeline my legal team had been monitoring for weeks. Linda reached for one of the copies and studied it silently. I remained seated exactly where I had been throughout the meeting. I did not interrupt. I did not celebrate. I simply watched everyone read the same public records that had quietly become available earlier that day. Finally, Linda looked directly at me. "You never told us any of this," she said. I answered honestly. "You never asked." The room became even quieter. My attorney then addressed the question that had started everything. Throughout this correspondence, Mr. Walker repeatedly requested the recorded declaration establishing that his residential parcel was subject to the governing authority asserted by the association. To date, no such recorded document has been provided despite numerous written requests. The association attorney slowly closed the file in front of him and looked toward the board members. They began searching their binders again, but this time their movements were noticeably slower. The confidence that had filled the room only minutes earlier had quietly given way to careful uncertainty. Every homeowner watching could sense that the discussion had shifted away from assumptions and toward verifiable public records. And for the first time since I had moved into Willow Creek Estates, the conversation was no longer about whether I would comply with the association. It had become a question of whether the association could legally support every claim it had made from the very beginning. The association attorney remained silent for nearly half a minute, while carefully comparing the county recording references against the documents my attorney had placed on the conference table. The only sounds inside the clubhouse were the soft turning of paper, the quiet hum of the air conditioning, and the faint rattle of coffee cups as homeowners shifted uneasily in their seats. Linda Ashcroft looked from one document to another as though she expected a missing page to suddenly appear and restore the certainty she had carried into the meeting. Instead, every new page only confirmed what the previous one had already established. My attorney finally spoke again, his voice measured and respectful. Everything presented here has been properly recorded with the county and is available through public records. Nothing has been concealed. The transaction became official earlier today. He then opened one final folder and removed a certified property map showing the commercial parcels surrounding portions of the community. Colored boundary lines clearly identified the clubhouse property, the management office building, portions of the guest parking area, and several utility access easements serving neighborhood operations. Beside the map sat the corresponding lease agreements that allowed the association to continue using those properties under existing terms. The room felt even quieter. Several homeowners stood to get a better look without saying a word. The association attorney adjusted the map so everyone seated at the front table could read the legal descriptions more easily. Linda slowly lowered herself into her chair. For the first time since I had met her, she appeared less like someone issuing instructions and more like someone trying to understand information she genuinely had not expected. One board member quietly asked whether the leases would remain valid. My attorney answered immediately, "Yes. Cedar Ridge Property Holdings intends to honor every existing agreement exactly as written. There has never been any intention to disrupt normal community operations." That answer seemed to surprise several residents. The tension inside the room eased slightly. My purpose had never been to threaten the neighborhood or create unnecessary conflict. I had simply asked one legal question from the very beginning and waited patiently for someone to answer it with recorded authority instead of assumptions. The association attorney finally closed every binder that had been opened during the meeting. He looked toward Linda before speaking carefully. "Based upon the documents presented tonight, I recommend that the board suspend further enforcement actions regarding Mr. Walker's property until the governing records can be independently reviewed and verified." No one argued. No one objected. Even the board members who had previously searched frantically through their binders simply nodded in quiet agreement. Linda turned toward me with a noticeably different expression than the one she had worn on the day she first approached my driveway. "Mr. Walker," she said softly, "perhaps this situation should have been handled differently." I answered with the same calm tone I had maintained since moving into the neighborhood. "I never asked for special treatment. I only asked for the recorded document that established authority over my property." She lowered her eyes briefly before looking back toward the stack of certified correspondence resting beside the association attorney. Every unanswered letter, every certified receipt, every request for documentation suddenly carried far greater weight than any violation notice that had been mailed to my home. The entire room could now see that the issue had never been about refusing community standards. It had always been about verifying legal authority before attempting to enforce it. As homeowners quietly gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, conversations sounded very different from those that had filled the clubhouse before the meeting began. People were no longer discussing whether I should comply. They were asking how so many important assumptions had gone unquestioned for so long, and I realized the greatest change taking place that evening was not ownership, leadership, or even legal strategy. It was that an entire community had begun replacing confidence with evidence. The following morning, Willow Creek Estates felt strangely different, even though nothing about the neighborhood had physically changed. The same sprinklers swept across carefully maintained lawns before sunrise. The same landscaping crew trimmed hedges with remarkable precision. Children still waited for school buses beneath rows of mature oak trees, and delivery trucks continued making their daily rounds. Yet the conversations sounded different. Instead of discussing parking rules or lawn maintenance, neighbors quietly talked about recorded documents, public records, and questions that many admitted they had never considered asking before. By the end of the week, the association board announced that all pending enforcement actions involving my property would remain suspended until an independent legal review of the governing documents had been Completed. Every outstanding notice, warning, and proposed fine disappeared from my file as quickly as they had arrived. I did not receive an apology in the mail, and I did not expect one. What mattered far more was that every future decision would now require documentation instead of assumptions. My attorney continued communicating professionally with the association's legal counsel, while Cedar Ridge Property Holdings completed the administrative work that naturally followed the acquisition. Existing lease agreements remained exactly as promised. The clubhouse continued operating without interruption. The management office opened every morning at its regular time. Residents parked in the same guest parking areas they had always used. From the community's perspective, daily life continued almost exactly as before. The difference was invisible unless someone looked closely enough to understand what had changed beneath the surface. Every meeting agenda now included supporting references whenever legal authority was discussed. Board members requested copies of recorded filings before approving policy changes affecting property rights. Even routine correspondence adopted noticeably more careful language. Assumptions had quietly been replaced with verification. One Saturday morning, I walked through the neighborhood carrying a cup of coffee as several homeowners greeted me with friendly smiles. A retired engineer stopped me near the walking trail and admitted he had attended association meetings for nearly 10 years without ever asking where certain authorities actually originated. Another resident thanked me for remaining calm throughout the dispute because, in his words, seeing documents instead of arguments had helped everyone understand the situation more clearly. Their comments reminded me that patience often teaches lessons that conflict never could. About 2 weeks after the board meeting, I received another certified envelope from the association. Unlike every previous letter, this one contained no warning, no demand, and no reference to violations. Instead, it formally acknowledged that the earlier enforcement actions regarding my property had been withdrawn, pending clarification of the applicable governing records. It also confirmed that the board had begun reviewing internal procedures concerning document verification before future compliance actions would be initiated. I carefully placed that letter into the same filing cabinet that already contained every notice they had previously sent me. It belonged there because it completed the record exactly as every other document had. Later that afternoon, I saw Linda Ashcroft outside the clubhouse speaking with several homeowners. When our paths crossed, she greeted me politely. There was no hostility in her voice, only professionalism. She mentioned that the board had scheduled additional legal training regarding recorded property documents and governance responsibilities. I wished her well and sincerely hoped the training would help prevent similar misunderstandings in the future. As I continued walking home beneath the warm afternoon sun, I realized that the greatest victory had never been proving someone wrong. It was watching an entire community begin making decisions based on evidence instead of confidence alone. Because neighborhoods become stronger when authority is measured by facts that everyone can verify rather than assumptions that no one ever thinks to question. Several months passed before I fully appreciated how much that single evening had changed Willow Creek Estates. The neighborhood still looked exactly the way it had on the day I first arrived. Flower beds remained perfectly maintained. Fresh mulch appeared every spring. Children rode bicycles along quiet streets while neighbors gathered for weekend cookouts beneath tall shade trees. From the outside, no visitor would have guessed that an important lesson about authority and accountability had quietly reshaped the community. Inside the association, however, the difference became impossible to ignore. Board meetings now began with copies of recorded documents instead of assumptions. Legal references were verified before new enforcement letters were approved. Questions that once might have been dismissed were now welcomed because everyone understood that confidence alone could never replace public records. Cedar Ridge Property Holdings continued honoring every lease agreement exactly as promised. The clubhouse remained open for neighborhood events, community celebrations, and board meetings without interruption. The management office continued serving residents exactly as it always had. My role never required dramatic announcements or public recognition because the transaction had never been about gaining influence over the neighborhood. It had simply been another professional responsibility handled according to the law. The irony was difficult to ignore. The woman who had once believed I needed permission to belong in the community eventually thanked my legal team for providing organized documentation that helped clarify several long-standing property questions the association itself had never completely understood. Linda Ashcroft remained courteous whenever we crossed paths. Our conversations became brief, professional, and surprisingly pleasant. We never revisited the afternoon when police officers stood in my driveway or the weeks of certified notices that had filled my filing cabinet. There was no reason to. The documents already told the entire story more accurately than either of us ever could. One afternoon, I opened the top drawer of my office desk and looked through the complete file from beginning to end. The first page was the welcome packet handed to me only minutes after I arrived in the neighborhood. Behind it sat every certified letter, every response I had mailed, every delivery receipt, every legal memorandum, every county recording reference, and finally the association's letter withdrawing its enforcement actions. Reading the file in chronological order felt less like revisiting a dispute and more like watching patients gradually overcome assumption. Nothing had been won through louder voices. Nothing had changed because someone demanded special treatment. Every important turning point came from one simple habit of asking for evidence before accepting authority. I carefully closed the file, returned it to the cabinet, and locked the drawer. I hoped I would never need to open it again. As I stepped outside, the evening air carried the familiar scent of freshly cut grass while the sun settled behind the trees at the entrance to Willow Creek Estates. Neighbors waved as they walked their dogs. Children laughed from a nearby playground, and the clubhouse lights began glowing softly as another routine board meeting prepared to begin. Life moved forward exactly as a healthy community should. Looking back, I realized the greatest surprise was never that the association discovered who represented the new landlord. The greatest surprise was that everything could have ended peacefully on the very first day if someone had simply answered one honest question instead of assuming the answer. That experience reinforced a lesson I have carried into every business decision and every conversation since then. Real authority does not fear documentation because the truth never needs to be protected from examination. It only needs the patience to wait until every page has finally been read.